We are live.
Thank you. Hello, everybody. Good afternoon. I'm Maggie Ullman, and I'd like to welcome you to the May 20th, 2025 Planning, Economic Development, and Environment Committee meeting. This is a remote meeting, and it's our first one back post-Helene, so yay for that awesome milestone. All committee members and staff are participating virtually. And to help the audience follow along, I'll state each section of the agenda aloud. We're streaming live on our virtual engagement hub, which is accessible through the virtual engagement hub link on the front page of the city website. We also have an option for the public to listen live by phone. For those of you out there today, hello. For today's meeting, we have the option for you to call in and comment live during the meeting. If you would like to do this, use the number 855-925-2801, meeting code 8187. Your phone will be muted. You'll hear the meeting live. At this point, speakers need to push *3 to enter the speaker queue. I'll move on to a roll call. So introduce yourself, come off mute, say hello as I introduce both committee members and staff. So first is Councilwoman Sage Turner.
Hello, everyone. I am almost at my office.
Sounds good. Thanks, Sage. Councilwoman Kim Roney.
Good afternoon.
Assistant City Manager Ben Woody.
Hey, everybody. Good afternoon.
There was a bit of a lag from when your video mouth was moving and when we heard you, just as a heads up. And also our Assistant City Attorney, Janice Ashley.
Good afternoon, everyone.
Welcome, welcome to all. All right, we'll move over to our agenda. Today we have 4 agenda items. The first is approval of the minutes from September 9th, 2024. Do I have a motion to approve?
So moved.
And a second. Great, motion approved. All those in favor say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Roll call vote.
And there you go. First item done. Moving along. Item number 2
Excuse
is
me,
looking
Maggie.
at the, yes ma'am.
I think somebody was saying because it's virtual, you're supposed to do a roll call vote. So,
Oh, I did not hear her, and awesome. Thank you. Yeah, this sounds a little funny right now, Sage, and my ears are not great. So roll call vote, that definitely feels more appropriate. So Councilwoman Roney,
Aye.
Councilwoman Turner,
Yes, sorry.
thank you. Sorry, I missed that. And myself, aye. The motion passes. Thanks, everybody. We're just getting the dust off our shoulders on this one a little bit. Agenda item number 2 is the PEDE or EPED or PEDI or whatever we want to call it, committee scope and overview. As we're doing with all of our committee meetings coming back after the storm, we're digging into our scope and where we're going from here. And with this, our Assistant City Manager, Ben Woody, I'll pass it to you.
Thank you, Councilwoman Ullman. If I am lagging too much with my video, I can mute the video if that's distracting, because I'm definitely having some technology struggles at the moment. But this should be a relatively short agenda item, and this is really just an overview to kick off this council committee. I hope to have some conversation as we discussed this. We had some earlier today at HCD. I thought that went well. And before I get started, I just want to congratulate you, Councilman Ullman, in being the chair of this committee. I want to welcome back Councilman Turner and want to welcome Councilwoman Roney to this committee. As far as I know, Councilwoman Roney, this is your first time on PED, so we're looking forward to working with you and all 3 of you in this new role. So what I'm going to talk about today, and you can go ahead and go to the next slide, Katie. What I'm going to talk about is we'll do a little bit of an overview of your 4 priority areas and goal statements, which those are what council developed early this year. We're going to talk a little bit about PED in particular, about your scope. We've drafted new scope for this committee, so I'd like to get some feedback on that. And then finally, we will talk some about work planning and what the timeline looks to really start things up again for this committee. So key takeaway Council, as you're aware, you established 4 priority recovery areas that will serve as the basis or the foundation, not only for staff's work planning, but also for how we allocate recovery resources. You also reimagined your council committees. We now have 4, one of which is traditionally been called PED, but we've added environment to the scope of this committee. So it's now planning, economic development, and environment. As we've talked about before, the committee scopes and the work plans and what we choose to do in FY26 is typically 2 things. One is there's steady state work and things that we do as a body. But this year coming up in particular, there'll be a lot of recovery focused work that will connect to PED as well. And then lastly, as we begin to develop those work plans and what we want to work on in FY26, that'll also allow you to align and provide assignments to advisory board that support topics that are handled by PED. Next slide. And I'll have question breaks along the way. So again, we've got 4 priorities, recovery priorities and goals: people, housing, infrastructure and environment, and economy. I'm going to focus more on infrastructure and environment and economy, but I am going to cover the other 2. Next slide, Katie. People is, I think council established this as a way to make sure we prioritize our residents and business owners that are recovering from this disaster 9 months ago almost, making sure that we communicate well, that we help support them at their neighborhood level, and making sure that we are paying particular attention to those that have pre-existing vulnerabilities before the storm. Next slide. Housing is another priority area, and this does connect with TED at times, particularly when it comes to things like zoning reform, or zoning changes. But the housing priority and goals is helping our residents navigate post-disaster housing challenges, which are already difficult enough. They're even more difficult moving forward. Trying to plan around future displacement events, looking at temporary and permanent housing solutions, and then using our partnerships where we can to leverage and maximize any dollars we put towards housing recovery. Next slide. This is our infrastructure and environment goal, and the first 2 really relate to the rebuild associated with post-Helene recovery. And I think one of the things on this is the idea that we're going to focus on the long-term resilience of our infrastructure, even if it means a longer recovery time. And of course, paying particular attention to their water system, flood management, and stormwater infrastructure to try to reduce future risk. I think these last 2 bullet points have a direct connection to PED. One is strengthening the city's ability to prepare for and respond to climate-related disasters. I think that is work that was already underway. I think that'll be magnified in the coming years as we work through our environmental policies. And then also prioritizing sustainability and recognizing the impact and role that will have in the recovery of our natural resources. Next slide. And this is our economy recovery priority and goals, and clearly this falls under the wheelhouse of PED in particular. Some of your goals for this is making sure that our impacted businesses have access to resources they need to recover and rebuild, strengthening outreach and supporting our underrepresented businesses, expanding our city's contractor pool. That's going to be really important. There is so much work to be done in this community for the next 5 years or more. And then finally, another key thing is looking at Asheville's overall economy and strengthening the resilience of that and finding ways to diversify and make our economic base more sustainable. The next slide, I will stop there to see if there are any discussions on your council priorities and goals and how those align with PED and the work this committee will do.
I'll jump in. So it sounds like, I mean, there's so many things that we want to accomplish, and there's such a wide range of things that I'd be really interested for my peers, you know, if we could have some type of prioritization conversation. I don't think that any of those I think all of these goals are our priorities, but I think that we could get spread really thin and make such slight and incremental progress that it would be valuable to me for us to have a discussion as councilwomen of what are our top priorities, particularly what do we need PEDE conversation time for, because there's so much work that staff is going to be doing where they need to be giving us updates and there are touches that involve us. But when it comes to program design or execution, that's staff's role. But we have a role when it comes to policy, when it comes to budget, when it comes to priorities, that I would be really hopeful that in this or a future conversation soon, we can talk about really how do we want to use our committee's time that really is exclusive to the role that council plays. Because I have a feeling that we have some clear priorities and hopefully we overlap in some of them so that it would give staff really clear direction. Like, these are the 3 things that Kim, Sage, and Maggie really want to dig into this year and are really specific to council's role. So. All right.
Thank
Well,
you.
I mean,
Councilman.
Stop. Other question. Yeah.
I'll chime in, Maggie. Thank you. I agree. And I think I was in an HCD meeting earlier, and I think we're going to probably see some slides about work planning next. So I was going to kind of save my feedback for then. But
Great.
yeah, I had a similar experience with this morning's HCD. Like, when do we have the conversation? I'd love to name priorities and kind of help in that, as well as work with staff on what they're seeing as our priorities. So I look forward to that.
Thank you. Or go ahead, Councilman Ronnie.
Yeah, I would just add that if we're front loading this with priorities, it might be harder to see more of where staff sees the intersections. But I, for one, would really like to hear more about what it looks like to have water treatment facility redundancy, or something I think our community is expecting is not just putting everything in the same place. Like, what's our plan for backups and resiliency in general for our water system, not just the treatment plant.
And you'll see this on the timeline. I think this kind of addresses, or at least responds to some of the comments. We will, on June 10th, we'll convene the first Policy, Finance, and Infrastructure Committee, which includes all 7 council members. So that's a great opportunity to have a broader discussion. And as part of that June 10th meeting, we are going to bring forward, number one is you'll be able to do some additional discussing and perhaps prioritization of your priorities and your goals. But I think also at that point, staff will be able to bring forward organizational work plan projects. So we'll be able to say, here are some of the projects that we could work on or prioritize as a community, as a council. And some of those will be absolutely, creating redundancy and resilience in our infrastructure. So there'll be an exercise on June 10th that will allow some of this to happen. And I think coming out of that, perhaps understand what committees are going to take up what kind of topics or programmatic areas. So that's coming.
Another thing that I'm curious about is, like, with our realignment with our advisory boards. I think something that, since we're just coming back, we have a chance to look at this with some fresh eyes. And I am curious what it looks like to have some more synchronization between us and our advisory boards, because folks are looking to share this work with us. And I think we could do better at syncing our work plans. But I also think we have some community partners and potentially from some disaster recovery survivor cities that are peer cities that are working through recovery, potential for us to bring in some people with lived in professional experience to help inform our decisions.
Great, thank you for that. Okay, I'm going to move to the next section, Katie, next slide. So let's talk about council committees, and I'm not going to cover the other 3 committees. I'm going to focus on planning, economic development, environment. And if you can go to the next slide, Katie. So what you'll see here is a draft scope. So this is kind of the scope of your committee and the types of issues or policy areas that you would work on. We took the elements of what's always been the PED scope, but of course we've rolled in some environmental policy areas. We've also tried to update this scope to reflect really what our kind of our current reality is and what FY26 is going to look like. So again, this is your scope. Review this with you. If there are things that are missing or need to be added or changed, please just let us know. So we'll start with the first two bullets on this slide, which are kind of the nuts and bolts of PED traditionally, and that's land use and transportation policy, as well as our comprehensive planning goals. So those are really those have always been part of the committee scope, and those are things that you'll see. I would say there'll be certainly storm-related touch points for these policy areas, but there's a lot of steady state work that happens on these policy areas as well. Next slide. And so digging a little deeper, one of the things that I think has really changed in the PED scope from previous to now is the economic development sections. And what you see in this scope is not only a focus on what I would say is traditional economic development and economic development strategies, but also trying to tie that into what Helene recovery kind of looks like for the next year. And that's with a focus on rebuilding our local economy, prioritizing the infrastructure that services that local economy. Kind of to your point earlier, Councilman Roney, looking for those partnerships to help improve and our economy recover. And of course, generally just helping our businesses navigate all the challenges they face. In terms of strategies, I think looking at the overall health of our local economy and where we're at. And then beyond that, what are some workforce development opportunities that can promote economic mobility amongst residents? And I think another important element is how do we look at our economy and strengthen the resilience and sustainability of that economic base, but also diversify that economic base. So again, very similar to previous scopes of the committee, but I think a little updated and reflective of where we're at now. And then of course, business development and expansion, that's always been a priority for PED. I think we have an opportunity to make sure that existing and startup businesses have the opportunity or the chance to participate, in the benefits and recovery opportunities that are going to exist for the next few years. Next slide. And lastly, but certainly importantly, our environmental focus. One is continuing to support our municipal climate action plan goals, which we're already helping to prepare us for this type of disaster that we recently saw, but looking to strengthen those goals and activities and our ability to mitigate, prepare for, and adapt to changing climate conditions. And then finally, and this is new for this committee, is supporting the concept of neighborhood-led resilience efforts and how that can build community capacity to withstand future challenges. And I will pause there, and Councilman Roney.
Yeah, so just giving a picture of what I was attempting to articulate earlier. One of the things that was coming up with our CDBGDR plan, which I'm very grateful was recently approved by HUD, we have $1.1 billion in need and $225 million to address it. So yes, $225 million is a lot, but it's not enough. So that's why it's so important that we set some priorities. But when the community input resulted in a lot of those neighborhood resiliency hubs, infrastructure conversations, what does it look like for us to bring in folks with lived and professional experience from Maui, a disaster survivor scenario, but also locally, if you have folks in the community garden network, for example, that are delivering on some of those resiliency hub infrastructure parts, to talk about what are the policies that the city has that make it hard to do that? Is there anything that we aren't seeing that the folks on the ground are recognizing, so that we could be better informed about what are the policy changes or land use changes that we need to make, so that our community can share the work together? And I think that could be informed by folks locally and folks who have dealt with other disasters folks that have dealt with flooding disasters would be important to have in that conversation. So in that role, we could be like a convener of the conversation to bring it to the public before it has to go to the council for sort of like that last touch of information, budget analysis, and a vote. But this is where we can, in my mind, get into some of the nitty gritty and include more people in the conversation.
I agree, Councilman Rawlings.
I'm not trying to just say a statement. I'm just trying to be like, is this a shared idea? The best example I can give is that when we had the Equity Engagement Committee meetings of the past, we invited our advisory boards that were underneath us to bring forward reports, but then it just kind of like dead ends there. It's like, here's the report on our work plan that we came up with ourselves, and it's kind of plops on us. And if we're synchronizing our work plans better, it'd be like, all right, where is, neighborhood advisory committee? Let's grab a couple local resilience hubs. Let's get a disaster survivor city. And then we leave with a recommendation about what does resiliency hub look like for Asheville, and what are the policies or land use issues that we have that need to change so we can get it done. I'm into having those kinds of conversations. It may make our meeting a little longer. So I would hope that we might be open to some flexibility around what that looks like. I also acknowledge that I'm just one member and that might not be the plan.
Ben, are we going to be doing a work plan? Is that the slides coming up?
Yeah.
Our staff? Okay, because I agree with Kim, and I think there's room somewhere in there for that. And, with Maggie's earlier comments about like, what should we be prioritizing? Just because I was in another meeting earlier, I know we're getting to this part, but I think maybe the work planning is the best place to target some of this stuff, guys. Yeah, go ahead.
I was going to say, I think it is, Councilman Turner. I think that, again, we're gonna have a meeting on June 10th. We don't get to see really the organizational work plan items that the city staff's proposing that hopefully implement your priorities. But when we're back in June as a committee, I think that's where you really need to spend the time developing your work plan. I do think, Councilman Roney, that you can kind of, within your recovery framework, try to prioritize what you believe to be important and what you want to work on. But I also think it's a great opportunity to try to crosswalk those priorities, not only with DR funds, right, that's out there, but also crosswalk those priorities with partnerships in your advisory board, because there may be other entities that know a lot about resilience hubs, and maybe there's a community-based way to move that forward that doesn't require so much staff time. But I think council kind of prioritizing that, and us making sure we can manage that is the way to be successful. So yeah, I think that's the kind of conversations we're going to have in June when we get into this.
And just one more thought on this. I do know that Thrive is convening a lot of those conversations. They're actually bringing folks down from Vermont who had flood experiences, I think June 2nd and 3rd. And so to what you were saying, Ben, of like, where is the place for us to have the community conversation? Maybe it's this committee, maybe it's community leaders. I think that at the end of the day, we can't do this alone is the bottom line. And I completely agree with you, Kim. We need to figure out what the structures are for us to be out in the community, where community is taking lead. And where is the conversation where it's about policy, which is really our distinct role, and how do we inform our policy making with community needs and wisdom?
Yeah, I'll chime in. I mean, we learned through Helene, the community is going to rise up in the ways that they need. So if they're not like partnering in this process of helping build them in the ways that makes everyone safer, then it won't work. So somewhere in there is a symbiotic relationship that I have a feeling will deal with subcommittee or our council, not council committees, the other boards and commissions coming back on and so on. Another example, and I guess I just mentioned this in the June meeting, is that I want to talk about economic development in light of what is happening in the River Arts District, and if it isn't building back, or if all these properties are going to go through the FEMA buyout and transition and uses, where are we compensating for in the city? Like the CBD discussion, is this the place to have it? should the central business district be looked at for increased boundaries and so on? Just, I don't know where those things live. I assume this committee, and if they're not on a work plan or under some note, I don't know how they get, light. So maybe June, we talk about those kind of things. Is that how you want us to work on this, Ben?
Yeah, I think so, Councilman Turner. Of course, we all have I think we have one thing in common is we haven't been a part of a recovery of a disaster of this magnitude in the roles we're currently in. So, but yes, I agree. I think we're going to really spend a lot of time in June trying to crystallize what city council wants, what's important to city council, which is generally a reflection of what's important to the community. And then I think staff making sure that we are moving projects forward that align with that. But I think all that said just as a city government, I think we've got to make sure that we don't overextend ourselves and we use our time, which is in financial resources, wisely. And again, that's where I think partnerships present a wonderful opportunity to get more done together. It's hard to put it all together, Council. You have to start kind of crosswalking different things and see how they connect and make sure that we're all working on things concurrently, but not in a way that's duplicative of one another. We're going to figure it out.
Hey, Ben, does the county have
yeah.
a planning board like we do? That isn't so much just a, review process for projects, but do they have a board similar to this?
Like a committee, like a commissioners committee? I'm not aware, actually. Does maybe Councilman Ullman or Ronnie know?
I don't think so.
Okay, curious.
Katie, next slide, please. One more slide. One more slide. Again, if anything on the scope jumps out at you, happy to have that feedback back from the committee. So one of the things we had some conversation on this morning at HCD, and I think this is probably more operational in a sense, but the question is how do we get things onto a committee agenda? And I'm going to start at the bottom two slides. Obviously, one way that the council committee works is based on agreed upon work plans, agreed upon council priorities. So some of that, I think some of the things that this committee will work on will hopefully get decided, or at least those discussions will advance on June 10th when you sit as a body and talk about that. The other ways that things can get onto this committee is these are functions or creations of the mayor. So obviously the mayor can assign the committee to work on something. The city manager's office, we bring things to the committee that are part of our organizational work plan, things that we want to see have a touch point with the committee before it goes to full council or just for general update. The other thing we talked about this morning is how does the committee itself put things on your agenda? And I think after some discussion where I believe we landed, perhaps, and Councilman Turner, you were part of this, is the idea that if the committee wants to initiate an agenda item, it would be 2 members of the committee that would agree to that and add it to the agenda. So these aren't policies or rules, these are just guidelines. It sounds like there's been some variation between committees in the past. So we're just trying to get a consistent format for how things come to and move through the committee structure. And I see Janice is unmuted, so I will pause there and see if there's any discussion on these guidelines for getting work items onto the council committee.
Well, the question came up at HCD. I think that the chair thought, can't the chair always put an item on the agenda? Or maybe it was Sage that raised that question. And as a general rule on committees, that is usually what the chair can do. The chair can add an item, but these guidelines probably are more geared towards having the chair and another committee member decide, not just have one person decide, but that's really up to you, as Bennett said in the other meeting. If this committee feels that you want the committee chair to have the authority to just add something to the agenda without another committee member agreeing, then that's fine too. It's a discussion point.
I got the follow-up question for the second bullet. It says the mayor, city manager can request. Who are they requesting to then? To the chair? Because otherwise then
Yeah, I think
one
it would be to
person
the-
in those
yeah.
situations. So the mayor or the city manager can request to the chair to have something added.
Yes, and that usually, as you know, Councilman Ullman, we just met, and you probably did this for environment and safety. Typically, the chair and the staff meet a couple of weeks before the meeting to try to settle or satisfy the agenda. And as you know, we have a document where we keep everything that's requested, we store on the document so that anything you ask, we'll put on the document. It's just the process by which things get onto the agenda. But I think that ends up being ultimately discussion between the chair and the staff that lays to the committee.
Yeah.
But we're just
Back to the point that you guys were talking about, and I'm the chair, and I think I'd say this even if I wasn't, or tell me where the rationale for this new idea of 2 members of a committee can add or approve an agenda item versus the chair being able to do that on their own. This seems new and not the practice that I've experienced in any of our committees. So why now, and where did this idea originate?
I think the reason this is here is to try to get some consistency across committees about how work happens, scheduled and moves through. So it can be flexible. It can reflect what city council wants ultimately. I think we just would like to see consistency across the committees. I think it's been different based on the committee chair in the past. I think there's different variations of that. I think the purpose of the why is to try to get some consensus or some cross-member communication on moving items forward.
The thing that's coming up for me though is we also have the rule that a majority of a committee isn't supposed to be talking outside of committee meetings. So that means 2 of us are not supposed to be discussing committee items or issues outside of committee meetings. So I feel like this needs to be workshops through some more of how we navigate that, because I'm not sure how that would work then. If we're expected, do you see what I'm saying?
Yeah, what I've done in the past for when I needed something on or wanted to suggest something for, let's say, policy, finance, and HR when I was on that previous committee, I would send an email to the group saying, for information, this is what I'm seeking. Usually that could just go to the chair, but it helps to inform the group. And we are allowed to do that within means as long as we're not deliberating. So I get that there's a need to workshop, but it does seem to me that this could also be a benefit to the community, that if something's on the agenda, then you know that it's been fleshed out enough to get support, and then we're not running staff around for things that might die in committee. So there's probably some pros and cons, but it would definitely help to have some legal framework for how we're meant to reach out about something that's pre a meeting that we're not allowed to talk about in a majority.
Yeah, to your point, exactly. Like, how do you flesh out an idea if you're not allowed to talk about it in order to get it on the, I think this needs to be thought through a little bit more before I'd be like, yes, I'm ready to say yes. I feel like I might get caught in some, I want to do the right thing. I want it to be consistent. I want this to be transparent. I want this to be fair. And I don't know that this gives enough guidance yet for me. Paige, you have a hand up.
Yeah, just a few things to share. I'm similar, and now that this is my second meeting of the day, I've had some more thoughts about it. And I guess if we're essentially defining process. It's not clear to me if some of these or all of these board committees or council committees have existing language or charters. I know some do. So if there is like a red line or marked up version of what we're actually changing, is that going to come to us at council? Is this like a consent item, all these changes? Because I feel like I need to see what we're really, if we're omitting, like, I don't know what we're doing here. And there's other parts of the process. Like, so now 2 members of a committee have an item on an agenda. Let's say it doesn't actually get through the committee. Are we saying that it will kill it? That there's not an avenue to the entire council if a committee kills an item? because that's been varied in the past too. So if we're going to define process, that might need to be in there. Is that what we're doing? We're trying to redefine all of these committees and how they'll operate. Really, that's essentially, this is all new language. It'll come to us at council.
Yeah, I went with worked with the clerk's office prior to these meetings to see if there was some sort of formal policy or document that outlined kind of how committees operate. We weren't able to, that's not to say there haven't been over the years, and but there's not one thing, there's not one document that I can reference. So I think what I'm hearing today is that if we're going to have guidelines for the function of these committees, we need to think on that a little more, probably put something in writing and bring that back to probably full council, or at least give council an opportunity to look at that and make sure we agree on the way in which we're going to.
Maybe it doesn't all need to go to council. I don't really want to overstep. It's just, I'm getting a little lost, and I can see how these things have come up. And as a chair in the past, I've done both what Kim referenced and emailing, but and then Maggie and I were on the phone earlier talking, we realized we were talking about this meeting, and then we're like, oh shoot, we can't do that. And now I don't know how things get to council anymore. So maybe just some clarity. Maybe it's a document. Yeah. I don't know if it has to go all the way up through all the ranks to council or not, or committees can define it. It sounds like we don't really know.
Well, work plans will help.
Mm-hmm.
Putting things on future agendas, which we can do right now, will help. If anything, we're probably going to have too much work to do and not enough. But what I also am curious about is if staff is it potentially finding a way to give a more definitive no? Sometimes the way that we as an organizational culture are perceived as saying no is by ignoring it till it goes away. And so having a way to be like, we don't have enough committee support to bring this to an agenda is a way to formalize a no. We're not going to pick that up right now for the public. And I'm curious if that's like an actual goal, then I'm intrigued. If it's just consistency and that's it, then that is a new way to move forward, and we could try it because we haven't tried it. And the lack of consistency has been really hard. When folks reach out to me, I'm like, oh, well, it depends on which group you're reaching out to on how they handle things.
Yeah, and I think getting to the goal of allowing us to have focus and therefore staff saying no is very important, because we're going to get overloaded with our steady state work and all the new recovery work. And I think the way I've seen that done in other organizations is through like effective prioritization processes, so that the work plan isn't just like, does this look good? Staff will bring you staff stuff. It's really what does this body, the three of us, want to work on, so that the work plan really reflects that, and that discussion, that discernment is done in a committee meeting in the public, so that we can really hash that out, and that there's less surprise last minute agenda items. It's more like, this is what we want to work on this year. Let's move towards that. I think that might get us where we want to go and mitigate the concern about one person commandeering an agenda.
It also kind of signals to staff that there's momentum to move something forward to council at the committee level. If we're like I put some things out there that I would like to see on a work plan today. I'm putting it out there because I'd love to see it on a future agenda item list, and that ends up on a future agenda. And I know we're not necessarily at that place right now, but I am trying to model that. But I do think that it helps with clarity. Once again, when we're talking about that advisory board realignment, if folks are like, gosh, I don't see finishing the urban master plan for tree canopy, urban forestry master plan, anywhere on a future agenda, who's the group to do that? Oh, it would be this one. So is this group going to do it? So they know who to reach out to, that there needs to be at least 2 council members to get on a future agenda. And then if it's like, we still don't have that, things have piled up so quickly, we are not going to make a recommendation to council, then they can go take that heat to council and be like, y'all better send this over to that committee to get it done. So it can create a better path to yes. It can also create a clearer path to no, which we can improve on.
Great. Any other thoughts on this topic?
I feel like we stress our staff out. So I mean, we're regrouping here. So I'm keeping a lot of like grace for the whole process, right? We're just getting our feet back under us in this process. And now we've got fewer committees doing more things. We've got to identify work plans, or our staff are going to lose their minds trying to keep up with our ever-changing goalposts. So I support this. I apologize for the way we're having to go through this and figure it out together, y'all. I feel like it could really create stress that's unneeded. We're probably going to get a smooth process as we get through June and work plan and stuff. So just a little reinforcement that I do think we're on the right path, but there's some tweaks. Don't feel so bad, staff. Okay.
I don't bad
Okay.
at all. I think
Okay, good.
a great conversation, and I like hearing this discussed, and I think it helps us a lot to try to set this up in a way that ultimately works for city council or committee structure. So I think this is fantastic, and I think we've already gotten several takeaways from two committee meetings today.
Good. Well, know that I'm watching out for how we load things onto staff's plate during such an already challenging time, when I know like exhaustion's at a high, and we're just now, I mean, work plans can be really stressful. And so I'm kind of, hopefully we'll hear from staff if it's just like this is too much,
And from a legal perspective, I'm glad you're all remembering you're communicating together, and that could be deliberating. And I'm going to talk to Brent about it and think, because I'm not quite sure that how much deliberation goes into deciding something goes on the agenda or not. It could just be an email. I want to put this on the agenda. And will anybody else support me? Yes or no? Or you may, that might not be realistic. It sounds like there is more that goes into it than that.
I won't say, I don't know. I mean, for the spirit of collaboration, I don't know that I always start with an idea that's full. I really value talking to my peers for their ideas to shape and frame and grow. And so I don't know that it's realistic to be like, here is my whole idea, yes or no. I think that kind of inhibits the collaborative policy making, where it's like, well, what's your flavor of perspective, And so for me, that discussion element, and I do that with staff all the time, I do that with peers. So that's where I see this could get into a challenge. Like there are times that it's easy, a yes or no, but there's a lot of gray in the world, and that's where collaboration is really meaningful. So yeah, some more feedback on that for this rule, so that I want to do the right thing. I want to do what's transparent. I want to make sure that we're productive. And I think, to me, getting some prioritization that we can discuss and have a work plan that we stick to is like the ideal outcome.
Janice, do we know if it's our rule? Is it a state rule? Whose rule is it?
No, that's what I asked this morning. All boards and commissions have rules and procedures. And so I was wondering, do the council committees have rules and procedures? Council has rules of procedure, but Ben said they looked for it and they couldn't find these kinds of rules of procedure for the council subcommittees. So
we could just say that we could just omit this whole two members talking to each other, and it could just become allowable by default if it's not documents we adopt.
Janice, I'm curious where the School of Government fits on this, because when I've reached out in the past, this is still a public meeting, so it still has to follow open meetings policy.
The majority of two members.
Correct.
That's something.
You mean, but I think what Sage was saying is, if right now you're all saying we don't think this rule is what we want to do. We want to do what we've always done, which is allow, I guess the committee chair could put anything on the agenda. And then, or maybe it was, how did it work? That anybody on the committee could suggest an agenda? Or was it just the chair?
Right now, talking about the two people communicating off a public meeting. So the chair always, in my history as a chair of so many years, I was always able to add something on the agenda. But I get that we're changing it now. Collaboration, no problem. But I'm wondering about if this is our opportunity to adopt rules, can we do away with this 2 of 3 can't communicate? So
you can't can the open meetings policy.
That's what I'm saying. So is it a state rule? Is it our rule?
It would be through the School of Government as the guidance that I would be seeking, but it would obviously help
Well-
if Janice, we had some clear guidance and some links that we can point folks to.
Oh, I'm
Yeah,
sorry.
Kim, I would like
wasn't
to hear
clear.
from our legal
you're-
attorney.
You're right. You're not going to ever get rid of if you're communicating, unless we can say, limit the communication so it's not a deliberation, which it sounds like there's a debate. Sometimes it's easy to say yes and no, and sometimes there is a discussion. So I'm sorry, Sage, I thought you were saying just get rid of this bullet 1 and just say any committee member or maybe just the chair can add an agenda item, and that it doesn't require 2 members to agree. That's where I thought you were going with that.
Yeah, that
So-
was earlier, but yeah, I'm just kind of curious about it all now, but if we didn't have any rules before, we have at least some statutory obligations somewhere.
Can we get some more information on how the open meetings policy from the state applies to our committees?
Yeah,
We can
bet
do
that
that, but it's the same. You are correct, Kim, that it doesn't distinguish between types of committees. It's the majority of a committee. If they're deliberating, it's a public meeting, so you would have to do that in public.
Yeah, it might help to have some links, and I would appreciate being able to compare it to my notes.
yeah, we'll work on a document. We'll incorporate that, Councilman Roney. So we will, and we'll have to bring it back to full council because we had a similar conversation at HCD this morning. So we'll pull some policy framework together for council committees, and if ever we were going to establish that, this is a great time to do it as we kind of reset everything. So we'll get that pulled together and bring it back to full council. Okay, that was a great discussion. Not making staff feel stressed at all. These are the kind of things we want to kind of sort out on the front end. Next slide, we only have 2 to go, I think. So so what we'll begin to do is come up with a work plan for this committee. I want to piggyback on something Councilman Ullman said. I think everything in your priorities and goals, all that's important, without a doubt. Everything in the action plan, the CDBG-DR action plan, important. All the steady state stuff and all just the ops, everything is absolutely important. So I think the challenge becomes sometimes is you just can't do it all. And I think that is one of, and maybe, that's why the prioritization that's why the exercise is so important, is how do we do what we can be successful at? And sometimes that means not that something's not important, it just means that it may have to get done or started at a little bit later date. So some of work planning, the benefit is trying to come up with what we can do in FY26 and what we can deliver to this community. And that probably isn't everything at once. So that's part of what this process is. I think, as y'all have referenced earlier, a lot of times other sources of funds, other community partners who can provide like people resources, there are other ways to kind of leverage what we want to do and accomplish that. We have to be just very strategic in that way. So with that said, this is just a mix. This is really high level. This is a mix of things that what I would consider to be steady state. Some things we were already doing, some things that we just do as an organization, but also the beginnings of the framework of maybe what are some of the recovery things that we'll want to tackle in FY26. I think as we move into June, we refine this a little more. Because one thing, for example, is we had a lot of discussion on the concept of resilient hubs. I don't have this on this tentative list. Doesn't mean it's not a priority. It's just, when I put it together, I just didn't necessarily add it. So that's an example of something we want to think through. But what you can see is, we're going to be doing a long-term recovery plan with Buncombe County. Clearly, that's something that needs to be considered somewhere in the council committee process. We have existing plans that were already important. I would argue they're more important now because they're extremely relevant based on what our current conditions are. One, for example, being the Urban Forestry Master Plan. In terms of programmatic things, there is in the DR action plan, there is a specific allocation to economic recovery. Clearly that crosswalks and aligns very closely to what this committee would do and have input into. UDO updates, comprehensive plan updates, things we're already working on that we want to continue to work on. And I won't read the whole list, but you can see other things in there that were underway or things. City real estate program and property disposition, always been important, but it's going to be critical as we move to the HMGP process and perhaps begin to acquire additional land assets around the city. And then just periodic updates. There's just things, I think one of the first things we want to bring back to this committee is the micromobility ordinance. You probably remember working on that. It's been a while, but that was probably going to come to your October meeting for discussion. So we're going to bring that back. And all that to say, when it really works well, I think when we figure out what we're working on for FY26 or what we're prioritizing, I think that's where we can really connect in those advisory boards and use their skill set to help advance those priorities. So I'm going to stop there, and any conversation on work plan topics or what that looks like or what you envision for this committee to be working on? Or does that feel okay to everybody?
I'm just trying to scan my memory because as I look at each of the like sub bullets, there's so much within many of them, you know, like municipal climate action plan has a lot. And so, as you mentioned, resilience hubs isn't necessarily called out here, although I would say there was such large council support at the retreat for that one that it might warrant its own bullet. Or like on the DR economic recovery, there was, you know, the segment of that economic recovery bucket that's for business grants, but there was also that big segment for revitalization and commercial corridors. And so I could see a priority that I hear from the community is how are we going to be balancing environmental safety and priorities and economic recovery in our river areas, and what does riverfront revitalization look like? I can assume that lives in the Wilma Dykeman and River Way plan update, but maybe, right? And so I guess I think as we get into, it sounds like our June conversation as a committee, we'll really get into some more granularity and detail of each of these sub bullets of kind of which parts are we really going to dig into. But I do think that this is a lot of work and a lot of work that needs to get done. And it really ticks off a lot of the things that feel appropriate within this committee's scope at first look. Councilwoman Rooney.
Help me understand where it fits in, like the Thrive Long-Term Recovery Group on construction, which I'm at that table. If they identify an issue with a housing solution and it fits under our UDO and it's like, oh, the UDO is getting in the way of this solution, and we want to see it on a work plan, is it already on here somewhere? Is that fitting underneath the recovery projects and programs? Or do we need to get specific about wanting to see how our UDO helps or is a barrier to our recovery goals?
Yeah, does that fit into the updates to the UDO and comprehensive plan? Because that could mean a lot of things. And like you're pointing to, Kim, I think that's an important one. But I feel like for us to have a clear work plan and for staff and council to stay aligned, I don't know if updates to the UDO is our sign ordinance, which I would say is not a top priority. And so I think a little bit, maybe some other layers within these buckets to ensure that the feedback loop from us connecting with community gets into these so that there's specificity could be nice.
So interestingly, I was having thoughts as you were, Kim, at the same time. And what I was kind of brainstorming around a potential item on the list could be identifying partner-led goals or something. Because like the Thrive is a great example. But I also wonder, as we learn more and more about business losses on Wall Street, you know, are there should we be doing economic recovery on Wall Street by making it the walkable street, pedestrian only street we've talked about for 20 years? You know, is this that time? And how does anything like that get light? Is there too much on the table, or is there a group, a partner-led group that could bring us some ideas? You know, I don't want us to tax ourselves while we're so overworked, but I also don't want us to lose opportunities. So maybe there's just some cohesion and partner-led efforts in the community, and we kind of sync up and see if there's ways we can support. And that's something on the work plan, as opposed to just like trying to brainstorm our own things and add them to agendas with 2 people and stuff.
So Ben, is that where staff is already seeing like, oh, we're already flagging that there may be policy changes that need to happen around the UDO, and it's already reflected there? Or is it like, no, y'all are going to have to get more in the weeds if it's going to be in the mix?
I think we've got to be a little more granular, got to drop down a level, because that was a good example. Is undoubtedly nobody's talking about the signed ordinance when they say UDO updates. But I do think like part of what the work planning, what's important for council is when we think about housing, and housing does overlap HCD and this committee a lot, actually. I mean, there's things like repair programs that we can get off the ground and, you know, kind of help maintain our existing housing stock. I would say if we want to continue to do housing related regulatory reform, that's where I think we need to really specifically identify that as a housing priority, make sure we have the bandwidth to actually do that. And that may mean that one of the other housing priorities may have to step back just a bit. I think those are conversations we have to have, Councilman Rowley, but I would say based on the last time we tried housing regulatory reform, it ended up taking a lot longer and a lot more effort than we expected. And that's because I don't think we went into it in agreement with what that project was or what the expected outcomes were.
That's really helpful. So I think that if you're needing us to get more granular about something that's so big, it's like if we're like, let's go out to lunch, and 10 people are very sure that means we're going out for barbecue, and the other 10 are very sure that it's not, then you might want to be like, we're going to barbecue for lunch or something like that. You need something that's very specific. So another example of that for me is maybe it's on here, maybe it isn't. But one of the things that I learned today from a contractor that's been applying for the jobs and recovery is that connecting to the issue that our local contracting average age of a contracting worker is like getting close to 52, we need to bring more people into the recovery effort, and that means more local jobs, and that means that the people who live and work here will benefit from rebuilding our city. But when we were talking about it at the CDBGDR level, we were saying like, oh, we know who the partners are. And this person was like, I'm sending all of my staff to get trained here. And I was like, we're sending the money to the wrong place potentially. So that's where I'm like, when it comes down to the economic part of our work, whether it's small business grant recovery or better understanding where we need to make some recommendations for funding, is job training and connecting local workers with employers. Is that in our scope of work right now? I think we might need it to be.
Yeah, and that's a great example of like in the DR money, there is the workforce development bucket, and that is in the economic recovery bucket. So I'm like, is that one? There's just so many sub bullets with each of these, and which ones do we want to focus on? Because I agree. I think that workforce development is something the city, there's a lot of really strong community partners working on that, and it's not been this big, robust effort the city has done in the past. And so where does that fit in? Where are we gathering the information? How are we connecting into that? And, you know, if each of these bullets has 3 or 4 below it, I think getting a little more focus on that project level, at least where council wants to weigh in, because there's so many things that staff is going to do awesome work, collaborating with great partners, but it might not bubble up to a policy level conversation, where I think is where that's our unique contribution, right? Staff isn't making policy, that's our function. And so which of these have policy overlaps that need to dig into in order for us to move forward? That's where I keep coming back to that role function.
And I think, and I would say not just policy, but budget plans and policy, is if staff is like, we're seeing that more as a policy, finance, and budget like conversation. It needs to be at a different table. That's why it's not on your plan. That's helpful to know. If we're talking about workforce development, then I would say, and workplace development. Are the places that are hiring right now ready for our workers? So that would be helpful to know from staff, is like, is that our bucket of work, or is that a different committee bucket of work?
Good conversation. I'm hearing loud and clear that we need to make sure we develop projects or have these discussions, having touch points and making sure we're thinking about potential community partners. Loud and clear on that, and taking advantage of those partners where we can. Not taking advantage of, but taking advantage of the partnership where we can. And then I appreciate what you said, Councilman Ullman. You know, we kind of do the nuts and bolts, we're the doers as staff. We're trying to get council to give us policy guidance. So yeah, when we say rebuild commercial corridors, that probably means two or three different things that are still at the policy level. So that's where I think we're rebuilding commercial corridors can be supportive infrastructure. It could be business grants. It could be loans. It could be a number of things. So I think that's where, from a policy perspective, council can hopefully help us make sure we're headed in the right direction with the projects and the operational things that we do. I'm going to go to the next slide, if that's okay with everybody. It was a great discussion. I think, so kind of a timeline, trying to tie all this together. We are in the midst of reviewing department work plans and proposed projects. You know, again, those have been kind of weighting those based on how they align with council's recovery priorities. Is kind of internal. We're going to hopefully finalize our organizational work plan early June. We will be to PFI or full council in June 10th. That'll be facilitated by Fountain Works. You'll have a chance to see the city's organizational work plan items. Also have a chance to think about how our work aligns with different committees or policy or recovery priority areas. On the week of June 16th, I don't think we have the date finalized yet, but that third week, that'll be after your meeting on June 10th. We'll have that follow-up workshop with boards and commissions chairs and co-chairs, also facilitated by Fountain Works. You know, hopefully when we go to that follow-up workshop, we have a pretty good idea of what city council's priorities and recovery goals are for the upcoming fiscal year. And then we're going to be back on June 17th. We may have a few normal items on that committee meeting for PED-E, but we'll need to work on this work plan and what that looks like. So ideally, when we hit July, the beginning of the new fiscal year, the new budget, we really understand and agree on what we're working on for the next fiscal year and start to bring those advisory boards on. Go ahead, Councilman Rowley.
I have an idea, and I realize it may be too soon. But if we put micro mobility policy recommendation on our June 17th, we could get it off our work plan real fast and get it sent to council, and I would support that.
I would support that too. Public
I'm here now,
deliberation.
Katie.
Ooh, I'm in.
Yep.
Yeah, I mean, like, let's get a win and something done.
Great. I love, nothing feels better, almost nothing, than marking something off the work plan. It's a great feeling. So yeah, I like that. I think our next slide is key takeaways again. So I don't have anything else today. I appreciate your time and conversation. It was very, again, we'll be back. Have many touch points with you in the coming month to make sure we get this right, working together. I'll turn it back over to you, Councilman Ullman.
All right. Thank you very much. Going back to our agenda, which is somewhere on my screen. So that was a robust discussion. Additional agenda items to be, the third item was, are there any additional items to be determined or any other discussions that we want to have amongst ourselves, council, now before we move on to public comment? All right. Katie, do we have anyone dialing in for public comment today?
Yes, we do. Just one moment, please.
Great. And a reminder to our caller, we do 3 minutes of public comment, and Katie will help navigate you and give you the cue when we're ready.
Caller ending in 5476. Your line is now open and you'll have 3 minutes to speak.
I hear like the faintest whisper of someone maybe talking to us, but if you're trying, check your mute or speak directly into the microphone, please.
Let me see, just one moment. Let me check something.
Thanks.
Okay, caller ending in 5476. Could you try again, please?
Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can.
Yes.
Thank you so much.
Loud
Sorry
and
about
clear.
that.
Welcome.
Hello, my name is Paige Huziak. I'm commenting as a member of the Sunrise Movement. I'm pleased with the enthusiasm that city officials have been showing for the idea of resilience hubs to protect our neighbors in times of need, such as heat waves, winter storms, floods, and wildfires. Sadly, we know that we have not done enough soon enough as a global community to head off all of the effects of human-induced climate change. And so adaptation to our changing climate our resilience and sustainability at the same time. While solar panels and battery storage are an expensive upfront investment, the use of these technologies and resilience hubs would be more reliable and sustainable for generating electricity during natural disasters than the use of fossil fuel generators. Fossil fuel generators require the storage of dangerous materials at the site and delivery of more fuel periodically. We saw in the days after Hurricane Helene that delivering supplies can be exceedingly difficult at the height of a crisis, especially with our isolated geography. Solar panels and storage have the additional benefit of expanding the capacity of the grid to integrate renewable energy production. In other words, solar panels and batteries not only produce environmentally responsible electricity 365 days a year for the Resilience Hub, they also reduce the barrier for neighboring buildings to use solar energy as well. Resilience hubs are most useful when equity and responsible urban planning are included in their implementation. Prioritizing resilience hubs in dense neighborhoods with many community members who are especially vulnerable, such as communities with disproportionately impoverished, racialized, and disabled residents, will ensure that our neighbors who are most in need of these resources will have access to them. Having robust public transportation serving resilience hubs would make them more accessible, especially for our elderly and disabled neighbors. Our more rural neighbors also deserve access to resources in times of crisis, and improving mixed-use zoning further from urban cores would make it possible to implement resilience hubs even outside of our already dense neighborhoods. We have a unique opportunity right now to build back from the aftermath of Hurricane Helene in a way that ensures justice for the environment and our most vulnerable neighbors and resilience in the face of the next disaster. That's all.
Thank you so much. Katie, any other callers?
Yes, caller ending in 5202. Your line is now open. You will have 3 minutes.
Hi there, can y'all hear me?
Yes, we can.
Oh, good. Okay. Hi, my name is Rachel, and I'm also a member of the local Sunrise Hub. And first, I just want to voice our sincere excitement that this committee is up and running. Really, really looking forward to the work of addressing the climate emergency and building back more sustainably and equitably from Helene. And we really are thinking of this time as like a time of big opportunities, even though it's a very challenging time as well. So we get to reimagine what kind of Asheville that we want to live in. And I hope we can focus on a few things as we do that. Number one would be being really bold about climate change mitigation as we also invest in adaptation. So we should acknowledge that it's going to take big transformations for us to reach our goals of 100% renewable energy for city operations in just 5 short years, and for the whole community by 2042. So it means we need to get serious about stuff like getting private gas-powered cars off the road by expanding public transit and building out EV charging infrastructure. And I think we need to be really aggressive about greening the grid, not just for city operations, but for more of the community. So that was number one, bold about climate change mitigation. Number two is spurring economic development that is equitable and environmentally sustainable. So for me, when I hear a lot of the economic development speak, a lot of it is focused on business owners. And we don't always talk as much about consumers and workers, who are really the majority of our participants in our economy. So I just want to make sure that we have a continued focus on supporting a living wage so that people who work here can also afford to live here. Focus on diversifying our economy, and in particular investing in green jobs so that really we can prepare for the stages of the economy that are relying on renewable energy. And three, the last thing, I just wanting to highlight continued community engagement and all the work of this committee and the recovery in general. I'm like really excited to hear y'all talking about how boards and commissions are going to be said like more into these discussions, as well as other community groups who are doing work on the ground, because it really does take all of us. Obviously, you all can't do all these things alone. And also it just works better when we're all involved and have a say. And the point I wanted to make about that is making sure we do in-reach into community and not just waiting for community to come to government, because, not everyone can be here on 1 o'clock on a Tuesday. So those are the main things I wanted to share. And I just
Caller,
wanted
your
to
time
thank
is
you for
now up.
Thank you so much. I hate the hook at 3 minutes, but it's a rule for a good reason. So thank you so much. Katie, do we have anyone else?
That was it, but let me reload and triple check. We don't have any last minute callers. No, Madam Chair, those were all of our callers.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. Appreciate your contributions. With that was the last agenda item. And without any other topics, we are adjourned. I look forward to collaborating with both of you councilwomen and staff. Looking forward to, sounds like what will be a really exciting conversation in June, where we get into some more details and expectations and priorities so that we have a real clear sense of what we're digging into this year. Excited about it and thankful. Take care, everybody.